Imagine this: France, 15th century. Not a country, but a land torn apart by war. Invaders from England seized its cities one by one. A king with no kingdom. Hope has abandoned every burned home, every despairing heart. And then, a flicker of light emerges from the darkness. Not an army, not a mighty commander, but a simple 17-year-old peasant girl. An illiterate girl from a small village. She has nothing but one strange story. She claims to hear voices, voices of saints who have given her an impossible mission: to drive out the enemy, liberate France, and make the king a king. Sounds like a legend, seems like madness, but this is the real story of Joan of Arc, the girl whose faith was stronger than any sword. And today, we'll uncover how one person managed to change the course of history. The story begins not on a battlefield, but in silence. In the small village of Domremy in the year 1412, where time seemed to stand still. Joan was an ordinary, even mundane girl. She couldn't read or write. She helped her deeply devout family on the farm and spent her days in prayer and communion with nature. She was a simple peasant girl whose life should have passed unnoticed, just like the lives of hundreds of others. But in her story, everything changed in a single moment. She was only 13 years old when she first heard them. The voices, they came not as a whisper but as a clear, distinct command from heaven. Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret appeared before her in a blinding light, and their message was both incredible and terrifying. They commanded her to do the impossible, to drive the English out of France and to crown the Dauphin, Charles. This was a mission that would make even the most seasoned commander tremble. She, an uneducated girl, was to change the destiny of an entire country torn apart by war, betrayal, and despair. Even to Joan herself, it seemed like madness. But instead of giving in to fear, she chose faith. In this seemingly impossible mission, in this belief of one girl against the whole world, lies the magic of her story. She understood that her life no longer belonged to her. She was merely an instrument chosen for a great, divine purpose. After receiving her divine commands, Joan knew she could not simply stay on the farm. Her mission was far too important. But how could an unknown peasant girl gain an audience with the Dauphin himself, the future king of France? Her first attempt to get an audience ended in ridicule. The local garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt, sent her back, assuming she was insane. But Joan did not give up. She returned again and again, with ever-growing faith, convincing him of her mission until he, astonished by her unbreakable resolve, finally agreed. So began her incredible journey. Accompanied by a small group of loyal soldiers, she embarked on an 11-day, perilous journey through hostile territory. Joan crossed a land teeming with bandits and enemy patrols, traveling only at night to avoid capture. It was a journey that required not only courage but an unwavering faith, as every step was a step into the unknown. When she arrived at the castle of Chinon, where the Dauphin was hiding, his court was already filled with doubt. To test Joan, the king decided to set a trap. He hid among the crowd of courtiers, dressed in simple clothing, while another man took his place on the throne. It was the perfect test for a girl who claimed to be led by God himself. The hall was filled with chatter, laughter, and anticipation, but Joan did not hesitate. She entered, walked past dozens of nobles, and without a word, stopped directly in front of Charles. She bowed and called him king, revealing his secret. This moment changed everything. Astonished, Charles pulled her aside for a private conversation, where she is said to have revealed a secret known only to him, which finally convinced him of her divine calling. In that moment, the Dauphin found not just an ally, but a hope that could save all of France. France was on the verge of collapse. For nearly 7 months, English forces had held the key city of Orléans under siege. Its walls were on the brink of falling, its people on the brink of starvation. The French army was demoralized. They were losing battle after battle, and every soldier felt the war was already lost. It was at this moment of deepest despair that a 17-year-old girl arrived. Her appearance was not just a strategic reinforcement. It was a miracle. Instead of commanding from a safe distance, Joan personally led the army, mounted on a white horse and waving her unique banner, which depicted Jesus and two angels. Her determination and faith were so contagious that the weary soldiers, who had previously considered her mad, found new courage. Under her command, the French launched an unexpected offensive. The battle that took place in May 1429 was not a prolonged standoff. It was swift, decisive, and infused with mystique. Joan personally led the assaults on the English forts surrounding the city. She inspired her troops with her presence on the front lines, even after being wounded in the shoulder by an arrow. Instead of retreating, she pulled out the arrow and returned to the fight. Her bravery was so incredible that even her enemies began to believe she was truly divinely protected. Thanks to her leadership and relentless attacks, the English forces, who were confident in their victory, began to retreat. Within days, the siege was lifted, and Orléans, which had seemed doomed, was liberated. This victory became France's first major success in the 100 Years' War. It was not just a military triumph. It was a psychological turning point. A 17-year-old girl who knew nothing of military tactics did what generals could not. She became a national heroine, and her name became a symbol of hope and rebirth for an entire nation. Following the triumphant victory at Orléans, Joan of Arc was determined to fulfill the second part of her mission, to crown the Dauphin, Charles. This was not just a political ceremony but an act of divine will, as traditionally, French kings had to be crowned only in the sacred cathedral of Reims. With spirits lifted, the French army embarked on a triumphant procession through territories that had recently been under enemy control. The march was so swift and stunning that English garrisons, demoralized by the news from Orléans, surrendered cities without a fight. Joan's faith was so contagious that it seemed she was opening the city gates with her presence alone. This was not a military march, but a true pilgrimage that symbolized the rebirth of France. On July 7, 1429, the French army entered Reims. Just 10 days later, on July 17th, the long-awaited coronation took place in the majestic atmosphere of Reims Cathedral. Everything was filled with pomp and grandeur. Bells rang, a choir sang, and light filtering through the stained glass windows illuminated the splendid robes. At the center of the event, next to Charles, stood Joan of Arc. She did not wear royal robes. Instead, she held her battle standard, a symbol that the victory belonged not to her, but to God. In that moment, France was officially reborn. The coronation in the traditional location gave Charles VII undeniable legitimacy in the eyes of the people. Now, he was not just the Dauphin, he was the true God-chosen king. For many, it was a genuine miracle accomplished by a simple girl. Joan had fulfilled her mission. She was at the peak of her fame, a symbol of divine will and an unbreakable faith that could accomplish the impossible. The triumph at Reims was the peak of her mission, but tragically, it was also the beginning of her end. After the coronation, Joan wanted to continue the war against the English, but now she faced the hesitation and caution of the king. Charles VII, having just secured the throne, became more interested in diplomatic negotiations than in continuing military campaigns. Joan, who continued to act on her divine calling, found herself isolated in her resolve. In 1430, during the siege of the city of Compiègne, fate turned against her. In a small skirmish outside the city walls, Joan was cut off from her army. As she tried to retreat into the city, the town gate was suddenly closed behind her. This was either a tactical decision or an act of betrayal. She was surrounded, pulled from her horse, and captured by the Burgundians, Frenchmen who were allied with the English. For the English, this was the greatest trophy imaginable. They saw her not just as an enemy, but as a powerful sorceress who, with the help of the devil, brought victory to the French. For a massive sum of money, 10,000 livres, a fortune equivalent to that of a prince, the Burgundians sold her. The historical tragedy is that King Charles VII, whom she had placed on the throne, did nothing to ransom or save her. His silence was the ultimate betrayal. The captive was taken to Rouen, where the English set up a show trial meant to prove that Joan was a heretic, and therefore her victories were not divine. The trial was led by Pierre Cauchon, a bishop who was on the side of the English. For months, Joan was accused of heresy, witchcraft, and wearing men's clothing. But even imprisoned, without advisors or support, she remained steadfast, refusing to renounce her voices. Her faith was stronger than their threats. She stood against an entire system, but she was doomed from the very beginning. And so, the day everyone feared arrived. On May 30th, 1431, a massive crowd gathered in Rouen old market square. Soldiers, priests, officials, and ordinary people. All had come to witness a spectacle meant to end a legend, but instead, it made her immortal. The 19-year-old Joan of Arc was brought to the square. She was dressed in a long white smock and wore a mitre on her head with the inscription, "Heretic, apostate, idolatress." The crowd was filled with a mix of hatred and pity. Unlike her executioners, Joan radiated a sense of calm and resolve. When she was tied to the stake, she asked for only one thing: for a friar to hold a crucifix high for her to see. It was her final gesture of faith, her last prayer. She did not falter in her beliefs, even in the face of fire. As the flames rose, Joan did not cry out in pain. She prayed. The last words heard by witnesses were her address to Christ. She cried out, "Jesus!" Joan's death was so moving that even her enemies couldn't hold back tears. Many English soldiers in the crowd were seen weeping. One of them, it is said, famously exclaimed, "We are lost. We have burned a saint." They had hoped that the fire would destroy her spirit along with her body. But the opposite happened. The fire that consumed Joan transformed her into an eternal symbol. She died, but her story only just began, as an unbreakable symbol of faith, courage, and resistance. The executioners believed that by burning Joan, they were putting an end to her legend. But they were wrong. 25 years after her death, when the English were finally driven out of France, King Charles VII, who had remained silent during her trial, finally initiated a process to rehabilitate her name. It was not just a legal trial, but a historical one, aimed at restoring Joan's good name and clearing the king's reputation of betrayal. The trial took place in Rouen, in the very city where she had been condemned. Over 100 witnesses were questioned, including her relatives, soldiers who fought alongside her, and even some of the priests who had been present at the first trial. The testimonies revealed that her faith was genuine and that the trial was a political charade, filled with deceit and procedural violations. In 1456, a quarter of a century after her death, she was officially declared innocent and her verdict was overturned. She had died a heretic but was proclaimed a martyr. But Joan's story did not end there. Several more centuries passed. She continued to live in the hearts of the French people as a national heroine, a symbol of patriotism and independence. And finally, in 1920, the Catholic Church took the last and most important step. Pope Benedict XV officially canonized Joan of Arc as a saint. The girl who was burned for heresy was now one of the most revered saints. It was the ultimate and complete vindication. Today, Joan of Arc is not just a historical figure. She is a symbol of courage, the power of faith, and fighting to the very end. Her story proves that even the simplest person, one with no power or wealth, can change the course of history. She reminds us that faith in your mission, even if it seems impossible, can overcome any obstacle. Joan of Arc lived just 19 years. She wasn't a queen, a politician, or a commander in the traditional sense. But her faith and resolve did what a whole army could not. She proved that even a simple girl can change the destiny of an entire nation and inspire it to fight. Her story forces us to wonder, was she truly a messenger from heaven, chosen for a great mission? Or was she simply a girl whose faith was so strong it could overcome fear and even death itself? Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and let me know in the comments who you'd like to see me cover next. Bye, see you soon.